Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to the All Saints podcast. It is great to have you with us again, and it is a particular pleasure to welcome the man sitting in front of you all, my good friend, your pastor, Jeff Shaw. Great to have you with us, Jeff.
Yeah, good to be back.
So, I want to talk about rules for prospective suitors.
Okay.
Because here's what happened. So, as you know, I have the privilege of serving as a member of the board and a faculty member at the Reformed Evangelical Seminary. And the Reformed Evangelical Seminary offers enrichment courses for members of local churches, including our own. And there's a number of people who are at All Saints who will have witnessed the discussion about courtship that took place in the premarital and marital counselling enrichment course recently. And during that, I wasn't there. I wasn't able to make it. But one of the pastors who was present, who will remain nameless, but not because he has anything to be ashamed of. This is really superb stuff. He emailed everybody a, 3-page PDF document, 2.5 pages, which contains what he calls my rules for prospective suitors. And I looked at this and thought, here is a wise man who's got his handle on how to preserve and maintain biblical propriety in terms of the relationships, especially for his daughters as they grow up towards marriage. And it's just really interesting stuff. And I thought really thought-provoking. So I printed out a few copies of it. Most of them I put in the drawer of my desk, ready for the next couples who show up or the next young man who says, what can I do to prepare for marriage? But one copy I gave to Pastor Jeff Shaw and said, hey, what do you think of this? Can we talk about this for a few minutes on the podcast? And so I'll just give you an overview of what it contains, and then, Jeff, you give me your initial reactions.
Well, first of all,
go on.
I mean, this is applicable to you and I as well. I mean, this hits home
my
pretty
daughters
closely, right?
My daughters are going to be so glad you pointed that out. Like,
do they watch the podcast?
They listen occasionally.
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
Sorry, girls.
Well, it hits.
Ladies.
I mean, it's pretty close to home for me as
it's
well.
A big deal.
I mean, I have a 16-year-old daughter.
Yeah.
So this could be the reality sooner rather than later.
Well, and what's intriguing about it, I think, is if I sketch the shape of the document as a whole, there's an initial overview which talks about the stages of a relationship moving towards marriage, friendship, evaluation, courtship, engagement. And I think it is possible to imagine how people might give different labels to those sort of stages.
Sure.
But it wasn't really my goal to interrogate the mechanics of that process. There's a brief section, the prohibitions prior to courtship, which perhaps we'd be wise just to come back to. But what really stuck out to me was this pastor's 10 requirements for eligibility. Because I'll read what he says, and then tell me your thoughts. A man who courts my daughter must be ready to marry my daughter. It is not enough that he intends to do these things or verbally assents to them. They must be a clear trajectory towards accomplished acts or habits. The substance must be there. I will, moreover, be seeking out multiple testimonies to verify the truthfulness of your eligibility. And what follows are 10 briefly expanded requirements. And I was just looking at them and I thought, this is, forget marriage and courtship for a second. This is just what every young man, and frankly, not so young man, ought to be aspiring towards, right?
Right. Yeah, I think it's a fantastic list, and I'm thankful for him producing this for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So we'll put the link to this, or we'll get the technical guys here at All Saints, to whom many thanks as always, to put a link to this in the show notes of the podcast, if that's possible. I don't know whether that's technically possible. I suspect it is. And also in the YouTube description. But I wonder if we could just go through one at a time. We'll skip over some of them briefly, but others we'll just pause on and just reflect on. And guys, of whatever age, young men and not so young men, hear these as they're applicable to you as aspirations for mature, faithful Christian godliness. And ladies, hear them as minimal criteria for the kind of guy you should be looking for. I mean, it's we all remember being 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, or 25, whatever it is, and we all can remember, even if the memory is slightly faded, the intensity of the emotions of that stage of life.
Right.
And you meet this guy, or you see this girl at summer camp, or whatever it is, and you think, oh my goodness, she's the one, or he's the one. And you can easily lose sight of the long-term priorities that really need to be front and center in your mind.
Right.
As you're thinking about what this future could involve. So just jump straight in. Okay, so number one, the first requirement for eligibility, he has the interest of my daughter. There is no point in going further if you're not someone she is interested in. God be with you.
Yep.
I just really
think
like
that's
that.
an excellent place to start. I mean, there's no point in suggesting that you want to put your daughter through something like that if she just doesn't have an interest.
Yeah.
And there's this dynamic, of course, that takes place where men can show an interest. And by the way, young men, if you've shown an interest in a young lady and you've been told that there's no interest there, then that's God telling you to
move on.
Move on.
Yeah,
find someone else.
It's interesting because it puts the lie to this idea that what we should be thinking about is some kind of arranged marriage. I think there is a kind of conservative fallacy,
right,
which is at work in the Reformed world, and this is a name that was given to a mistaken way of thinking by a friend of mine, Stephen Jenkins, where what we do is we think, okay, what are progressives doing?
Right.
And let's move as far as we can in the opposite direction.
Swing that pendulum all the way.
Right. And so what progressives typically do in this caricatured vision, which is probably too close to reality, is everything is about emotions, everything is about immediate gratification, and nothing is about responsibility or even or authority for parents and the father of a young lady.
Right.
And so what happens is some conservatives think that if that's wrong, whatever is furthest away from that must be right. And I've actually spoken to people who advocate a kind of arranged marriage. And that's not to say that there can't be value in introducing people or praying for particular people, but guys, I mean, if your daughter doesn't like him, that's okay. That's fine.
Right.
Now, sometimes a young lady doesn't like a young man because she's looking for the wrong things.
Wrong things, yeah.
In that case, he's better off without her. And God be with you.
Yep. Yeah.
Number 2. He's near the time for getting married. There's no point in doing anything right now if the young man is not within a year or two of getting married. It could be that he's too young or that he's in a college program which will occupy his time for 3 or 4 years. What I'd recommend to such a man is to prepare as well as he can, but he will have to wait until he is in range to begin the process of evaluation, a year or two.
Right.
And I think this is fascinating as well because it's not tapping the brakes, is it? It's saying, my son, you should have different priorities right now.
Well, a lot of the things that are going to come down the list will tell us whether he's in range as well.
Right.
Because although you skipped over the actual numbers or the ages that he gave here, I wouldn't put an age limit on this necessarily. I mean, obviously, 15, 16, 17 years old is very, very, very young, too young. But but at the same time, really, it depends on what other ducks he's put in a row, so to speak, to make him ready.
So near the time could be like you're just too biologically young, right?
Yep.
And you might be a really, really mature 19-year-old, but you've got 4 years of college, and you're not going to be able to provide for a wife. You might be as mature or even more so as a 19-year-old could possibly be. And mum and dad and young daughter might think you're the bee's knees, but you're just not ready for this because you're just not ready to provide. Or it could be you're 25 or 30 and you've got some serious growing up to do. And I'll tell you, I've had conversations like this with young men where I've said, no, I think I wouldn't counsel you to marry now. I'd counsel you to work on these specific issues.
Right.
And get yourself to the point where in 2 or 3 years' time, if Miss Right comes along,
you're ready.
You're ready. And she falls in love with you because you're the most godly man in the room. So there's those elements, aren't there? And I think what can sometimes happen, and again, this is a version of the conservative fallacy, is in a world where people are delaying marriage for the sake of career until they're 30, 35, even older, we think, if the progressives are moving it older, we should move it younger. So if 22 is more godly, 20 is even godlier, and 17 must be more godly still. And it's like, there are circumstances where getting married young is not impossible.
Sure. And also, I mean, we're not going to be so narrow as to realize that different ages had different standards, right?
Correct.
I mean, our grandparents probably got, I don't know about your grandparents, my grandparents got married when they were
very young,
still teenagers.
Yeah. We both know at least one very respected and eminent pastor in our denomination who got married when he was in his teens, and wonderful husband, and his wife is a wonderful lady.
Right.
But at your point about different cultures, different eras, and then it's different where you are in the world, what your aspirations are. If you're 20 and you're making decent money and you're a godly man and you're in your career and it's going well, maybe you're ready.
Right.
Where an equally godly man who's 21, who's still got 2 years or 3 years of college left, isn't ready. and it's not necessarily his fault. And then a guy who's 35 and is still, lying in bed all day on a Saturday watching YouTube, he's not ready, and it is his fault.
Right.
Okay, number 3, he walks with God in sincere faith. He is disciplined in prayer and meditation on the Word of God. He should be a person of strong, reliable convictions shaped by the law of God. He is one who is actively putting his sin to death. His loyalty is to his Lord above his wife and children. Good old-fashioned evangelical godliness.
Yeah. Piety does matter.
Yeah. I wonder if, do you want to speak to this? Do you think there has been a good move in our Reformed circles away from a purely internal piety towards external manifestations of maturity, which we'll come to? But piety does matter. The heart matters. The life of prayer matters. Meditation on the Word matters. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we want to see our men doing in our church as head of households is to be leading their families in reading the Word of God together and praying together and family worship together. Well, if these aren't disciplines that you have on your own, that's just not going to happen. To expect that it's going to happen is fantasy.
Yeah, and there's this myth that all the things that are wrong with me, my lack of sexual self-control, my lack of prayerfulness, my foul language, all these are going to be fixed as soon as I'm married, because there'll be this wonderful lady around and I'll have to step up. It's like, no, they'll be fixed for a good 10 days or so, about the length of a honeymoon. Or maybe a touch longer.
She's going to see who you really are.
She'll see who you really are, and she'll start to wonder, what have I done? And you address those things beforehand. It's the same with academic study. You can't be a slouch for 10 years of school and then get to 2 weeks before the exams and suddenly flip a switch and become a student who can concentrate.
Right.
There's one, I think it's the longest single paragraph in this section, which touches on a particular issue of godliness. I'll just read it and then give me your thoughts on it, Jeff. Because of the epidemic of pornography, I will require the young man to make me an accountability partner for all electronic devices he has access to. If he has electronic devices that access the web but cannot be overseen in this way, he will need to hand them over for this period or get rid of them. If he's unwilling to do that, I will consider that a deal breaker. I do not expect that any man living in this age will never have been tempted or even overcome for a season by pornography. I do expect that any man marrying my daughter has self-control over the flesh and has made all sin his mortal enemy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to expect that if a man is going to pursue your daughter, he's going to be pursuing her in fidelity, right? And so if he's basically showing unfaithfulness by looking at other women, well, good luck with that. That's just not going to work out well.
Yeah. And I'm struck by you put these two paragraphs side by side. You've got, I think this is, I know this, the pastor who wrote this, he's a fantastic guy. And you've got the combination of heart religion and extremely practical steps to deal with sin.
Right.
And I just love that. I think we've got to get serious about these things, because both at the level of our hearts and and how we think in private, and do we love Christ, and what are we going to do to fix up these glaring black holes in godliness?
Right. And I think I think it is great that he says, I don't expect that a man hasn't been exposed to this temptation, maybe even succumbed to it, but the willingness to be accountable to him personally as the father of his daughter. I think that's a great measure.
Yeah, we want to simultaneously say, for those men who have not viewed pornography, or for whom it hasn't been a particular temptation, don't slacken your guard and keep that up, and God bless you and well done. And then at the same time, we recognize that some people are exposed, sometimes by parents or trusted family members at a very early age, and end up tangled in this web they can't see a way out of. And if you're in a position like that, and you're able to go to the father of a woman with whom you've fallen in love and say, well, look, I was in a mess for 10 years as a teenager and a young adult, but then 18 months ago, I went to my pastor. I said, Pastor Shaw, please will you help me?
Right.
And I signed up with him, and I can tell you I haven't looked at a thing since, and I'm happy to sign up with you. if you can, a young man who can say that has shown repentance and shown commitment to Christ in
He's
a really
made himself accountable, and he is fighting the good fight.
Yeah.
He's mortifying his sin.
Yeah. Be killing sin, or it will be killing you.
Yeah.
John Owen. Yeah. Number 4, he respects God-ordained authority, especially his father and mother. I just love that.
Yeah.
I
you
love
want to
all
see
of
how a man will treat his wife.
Yeah.
Look at how he treats his mother.
Yeah.
Is a good signal.
Yeah. And the respect for authority is an interesting one, isn't it? Because, again, I think for a lot of young men in our age, they've encountered contexts, particularly in the public square, where authorities have made demands of us that we think are highly questionable. We don't need to rake over 2020 and 2021 to think of examples of that. And so what's happened is that a lot of guys who are now 20, 21, 22, they were becoming men, 17, 18, during an era where they and sometimes their fathers and other role models were talking a lot about resistance to illegitimate authority and the limits of proper authority and the danger of tyranny. And so a lot of guys who are now young men, that's been what they've been exposed to. And this reflects the legitimate concern that, you could fall off the bridge on the other side. And that's probably more of a danger for us. In other words, you can become so independent-spirited you won't listen to anybody.
Right.
And you don't want... Can you imagine the thought of handing over your daughter to be the wife of a man who will not listen to anybody? He's the only meaningful authority in his own life.
Right. And we don't want to suggest that somebody who comes from a broken family, who's had to endure that's not their fault. That they came from that background, that they're not a good catch. We know lots of people in our congregation who didn't have that benefit, as I had that benefit, a really stable family. But I think it's when you do have that stable family in the background, it's looking at how they treat how they interact with their father and mother, and whether they. I would also add, and I don't think he adds this in here, but I would also add that you do want to find a man, though, who will leave his father and mother.
Yes.
And start his own family. So you want him to respect his father and mother, but also to step up and be his own man, and not be a mama's boy who just is at every whim and beck and call of his father and mother, because there is some leaving and cleaving involved in this.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think that's a fascinating insight, because in our circles, again, I think this is a weak point. So we're living in an age where progressive ideology has fragmented family relations and made relationships between parents and children seem inconsequential.
Right.
And there has been a pushback against this, which in some contexts has gone too far and in a wrong direction. It's become a kind of hyper-patriarchy or hyper-matriarchy. In fact, I've even heard of adult men who are married with children referring to their own parents as, well, this is my covenant household. In the context of, for example, where should you worship? Well, we've decided to go and worship with our covenant household. And I want to say, look, you might want to worship in the same church as your parents. That's great.
Right.
That's not your covenant household. Right. A man will leave his father and his mother and cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the cleave word, as you know, is the word used in Scripture to denote a covenant being formed.
Right.
So both daughters leaving mum and dad, and young men leaving mum and dad and forming a new household. That's why these guidelines matter so much, because you've got to trust the man who's going to be leading that household.
Right.
And I think, this speaks to an issue maybe we should talk about on another occasion, but let's put a pin in it now. Parents letting go.
Right. Right. Not meddling and not creating.
And not having the expectation of their relationship to their children being basically unchanged when their children get married.
Right.
I've known contexts in which, the Sabbath dinner or the regular family gatherings are not actually with every week with the covenant household. They're with the matriarch and patriarch. And that's not to say that's bad. It was wonderful, actually. It's a wonderful thing.
But the expectation should not be there.
Right, but exactly. The instinct should be to say, and you mentioned our own families. I'm speaking as a pastor. I've got 3 kids. The oldest is 21.
Mm-hmm.
So Nicole and I are staring this in the face when our children will form their own households, and one day they will say to us, we'll say, hey, you're going to be coming around for Christmas, or you want to come back for Thanksgiving? And they will say, Dad, we're going to be spending Thanksgiving together as a family.
Right.
I'm like, that's great.
Yeah.
And it is tough, but letting your young men and young ladies grow up, and then who knows, they might even want to come back and see grandma and grandpa at some point.
Exactly.
Right? Because you've not been this overbearing tyrant the whole time.
Right.
Alrighty, we move on to the next one.
Yeah, sounds good.
He pursues wisdom diligently. Here, our pastor friend is talking about books, seeking counsel from older, wiser men. He should be especially concerned with, this is interesting, it's not just theology, it's running a household, finances, work, controlling his anger, controlling his tongue. Children generally do not rise above the culture of their parents. Oh, Lord, preserve us. If your experience growing up was not one of actively pursuing wisdom, you need to amend this in your own generation. I think those last 2 sentences are very thoughtfully put, aren't they?
Yeah.
So, first up, growing in wisdom in the sense of skill at life. Can you keep a budget? Can you make a budget? Can you do math? Do you know how much you earn, how much you spend?
Right.
And then realizing that your parents may have taught you things, they may not have taught you things. Either way, you're going to need to step up.
Right.
And take responsibility.
And this emotional regulation too, anger, controlling the tongue. You know, when I was a dean at the college, one of the things that we always did when we had new applicants was we checked out their social media, because, you know, that would tell us a lot about who we were getting, because they could, they could apply and tell us how they put their best foot forward, because they wanted us to accept them and give them a big fat scholarship. But we wanted to know who they really were. Yeah. Were they uncontrollable? Were they angry all the time? Were they perverse? And so, I would maybe add that to the list of, if you're on social media, let me see you unfiltered, so to speak. Let me see who you really are.
And of course, there's a response to that, which would be precisely the immature response that you'd not be looking for from a young man who would say, "Oh, great, well, I'll just go anonymous then." Yeah,
right.
And they're like, no. The point of coming off social media or of controlling yourself on it is that should be the reflection of a pious and faithful life and a godly heart. Yeah. And it's interesting. I guess that anonymity point raises another issue, which is that young people frequently imagine that they can keep things secret.
Right.
Because they're not old enough to have experienced the process by which things that were once secret come out. And once you've been a pastor for a few years, you've seen that so many times.
Right.
You just know that if it's there, it will emerge. So it had better not be there.
Right.
It had better be repented of, so it can be buried at the foot of the cross and dealt with, and then you can move on.
Right. Right. Yeah, that would be a big red flag if somebody was using anonymity to post things that were hateful or all
that stuff. He attends, this is number 6, he attends and faithfully participates at church. It should be an ethic in his house that he will always go to the required meetings of the church. He must be a churchman, one whom the leadership trusts as a reliable member. I think that's a great way of framing how we'd ask the question of ourselves, right? If a pastor from elsewhere or a father from elsewhere said, "Hey, tell us about this guy in your congregation."
Right.
Do we trust him as a reliable member? He would not move away without knowing there's a faithful church that he can move to.
Yeah. What a great sign when men actually consider, before making a move for a career, let's say, what kind of churches are in those areas? What's that situation going to be like for my family?
Yeah, I've seen this, and actually this is one of the things I remember seeing very early on, when the end of college approached. This is going back more years than I care to remember. Our pastors were warning us about people who were a year or two beyond us, who had found the dream job, and then they'd found the dream apartment, and they'd sort of waved a hand at, "Oh yeah, there's some churches down there."
Right.
And then they get there and they start going around the churches, and 6 months later they realize, there are no great churches down here. There's 1 or 2 that are okay, and the rest are terrible.
Right.
And again, if you've not done that and made that mistake or seen that mistake, you could easily not know how ruinous it is. Scripture tells us how ruinous it will be. There are some lessons that are best learned from other people's mistakes, not your own.
And it's so encouraging also. I mean, in our congregation, we've got the testimony of somebody recently who said, hey, I'm looking to move down that way. And you're like, why are you thinking of moving that way? Because it puts us closer to the church, closer to our school. And
and when people do have to move away, we get these messages. I actually had one just this last week from a family that may need to move. And they said, hey, can you tell us about this church? It's a CREC church, but the husband was saying, give us the next layer down, and I've actually been there, and I was able to say, it's a great church.
Good.
Of course, it's not as amazing as, anyway, joking. Anyway, we digress. So number 7, he seeks responsibility as the only pathway to mature manhood. I'm reading all these. Why don't you read this one, Jeff?
All right.
And linger over it, because this is one of the best.
Many fools seek money and treasure as the path to manhood. Some seek masculine activity, like exercise, manly hobbies, or dress. These things are fine to pursue, but not at the expense of responsibility. There are very many emotionally backward, irresponsible, unreliable men with large biceps and awesome toys. When a man is young, he should seek out many opportunities to serve. As he grows, the community will no doubt recognize his worth and place greater and greater weight on his back. Only in this way will he grow to be a strong, reliable man.
That's going on the little notice board for quotes outside my study.
All right.
And it is fascinating as well.
This is what a strong man looks like.
Yeah, right? It is. It is. Again, it's one of these things which is so understandable in a feminized church. We've had a lot of people coming to us here at All Saints who've come from places where, in a sense, the church was great in lots of ways, but it was the piety was shaped so as to prioritize and privilege more typically feminine emotions and feminine expressions of devotion.
Right.
And men were, if not disparaged, not encouraged to be men. And then what happens is you get a bunch of guys together at a place like All Saints where they're putting that behind them, and it's like, where do we go? And the caricatured visions of masculinity leap straight out at you, and that's where the problems really start. Right. We don't need to say. Well, we could say 1,000 words more about that, but okay. All right, number 8. He has a good prospect for provision. This blew my mind when I read this because it's so direct. He should make, or be far along the path to making, a salary that will allow my daughter to stay home with young children. He should have a reasonable path to this, expecting children to come quickly once married. In the greater Portland area, that gives you a clue who this pastor is, by the way. Anyway, in the greater Portland area, he should be on a path to making over $100,000 a year. I want to see that he is saving, living on a budget, and working diligently at his vocation. I don't think I've ever put a number.
No.
I've talked about this before.
I might. That's Portland, maybe.
Portland. Portland is the what's it called index is pretty high up there, right?
Yeah, I don't want any of our listeners to think if you don't make $100,000, you shouldn't be pursuing a bride. Right. I think that could honestly make too much of a priority of money. Right. But I do think, obviously, I think the point he makes about wanting for your wife to be able to stay home is a fantastic priority.
Right.
And it should be the priority, right? Especially if you're going to have children, because what are you going to do? I mean, you don't want to have children and turn them over to everyone else to raise.
Right. Well, I think what it does speak to is a couple of things. So it speaks to the empirical reality that it's very, very difficult to raise a family on a minimum wage salary, or even just slightly above minimum. If you're earning $15 an hour, working 50 hours a week, you're still earning less than $40,000 a year before tax.
Right.
And if you're in that position, more painfully than I could emphasize to you that that's not going to be easy to even rent a place, pay utilities, and be married and raise a child. So for people who are in a position to do something about that, which is actually not everybody, But it is most people. Most people are in a position to push themselves and open up opportunities to provide financially for a family in the future. And we've got to get away from what's left of this silly minimalist gospel, money is bad ethic, which I think is what a lot of us grew up hearing, as though money is the only thing that's wrong with the world. Actually, it's a really, really great thing if a man is working hard either at college or working hard in his vocation to progress, so that he can say to his wife, babe, I would love you not to have to work part-time. We've just had our baby daughter. I want you to be able to stay home and to be 100% focused on her and not to feel overwhelmed by all the competing demands. That's a really godly thing for a man to aspire to, right?
Right. And it goes hand in hand with what he progresses to say in the last two here, right. Which is all about children. I mean, these go hand in hand.
We'll transition to those number 9. And maybe let's keep them separate. Do number 9 first. Go ahead.
Yeah. He wants to have multiple children, thinking about how he will provide for them and educate them. He's committed to Christian education, whether it be homeschool or private school or a mix of both. And he will not consider any form of birth control that is abortifacient.
Right. And this is getting at the scriptural, or one of the key scriptural purposes of marriage and family life. Right. And again, I think this is an area where mostly the Reformed recovery of biblical piety has landed somewhere close to the center of the target, right? We're in an age where birth rates are dropping, a progressive world where people are eschewing family life and the privilege of children for a career or something else. And we're wanting to say, no, kids are great.
Right.
And it's not like, hey, you get more prizes because you've got 6 kids and I've got 3.
Right.
It is, we love kids. We love children. We want
children
to have
are a blessing from
children
the Lord.
are a blessing from the Lord if we're able to have children. And not everybody is, but if we're able to have them, what a joy, what a privilege. And that's central to what it means to be a godly man, a godly woman, to be a mother or a father if you're able to have kids, and therefore to arrange other things around that.
Yeah, I don't want to be too dogmatic about this, but I do think that you're ready for marriage when you're ready for children too, for the most part, right?
Yes.
I don't think that it ought to be about the potential, right? It ought to be about the reality. We're again going back to what can I make? What can I provide for my wife?
Yes.
I think, she could get pregnant one way or the other. So it'd be good to be in a position where it's like children are a blessing. We embrace that. We're not thinking get married and spend the next 5 years necessarily not having children because we want to do all these things or we need to get our life in order. You're ready for children when you get married. Yeah,
and a lot of the challenges they arise from people either not really understanding or not really being honest about their emotions, I think. So, of course there is a sense in which, you get married. Is it a sin to not try for children immediately? No, come on, let's be mature about it. But you get to a certain point where you have to say, okay, why are you delaying again? Oh, it's because we really loved the skiing last year in Colorado and we're making good money now. And, if she's pregnant, we won't be able to. I'm like, oh, come on. Right. Well, our car's not big enough. Oh, okay. So, squeeze them in, but let's not minimize the glorious blessing of children on account of comparatively trivial things.
Right.
And on the subject of children, number 10, go on. Let's do this last one.
His conviction is that infants should be baptized and spiritually nurtured as members of the church. To be clear, he should hold to paedobaptism and at least small child communion. Children were meant to be raised in the faith, not treated as aliens. The young man does not need to be a CREC member, but he should seek out a church that cares for his children. Amen.
Whew, hardcore, this guy.
Yeah.
I love it.
Don't hinder your own children from coming to Jesus.
You see, what I like is that it is clear without being condemnatory. So our Baptist friends, God, this is not drawing the circle of those who are saved tightly around the CREC. What it is saying is raising kids as baby believers within the church, seeking not to evangelize them as pagans, but to nurture them as baby Christians.
Right.
That is a distinct and highly significant theological conviction. And it can only be inconsistently held by somebody who doesn't hold to paedobaptism. I think I know many Credo Baptists. Actually, I think that's the wrong term. Anti-Pedo Baptists. Many Baptist friends who have wonderful families and wonderful children, and yet I'd want to say that practical piety is exercised in spite of their theology.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's a contentious issue, and my Baptist friends are now gnashing their teeth, and I can expect a few emails. Email me, guys. Let's talk. But I want to say, look, with my daughter, with my grandkids.
Yeah, and this whole thing is from the perspective of
Right.
you're the father of the daughter.
Yeah.
These are my rules for a suitor.
We have a responsibility to our children
Mm-hmm.
to help them to make decisions which will cause their households to flourish.
Right.
Now, even there, I can imagine circumstances, I just about imagine circumstances where I might say, you've got this conscientious Baptist guy who is obviously committed to raise his children faithfully as believers.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, where the inconsistency lands him on the side of covenant nurture rather than landing him on the side of a highly consistent anti-Pedo Baptist piety, right?
Yeah.
But this is a great general rule, because what it says is, as a parent, if we just draw these things together, as a parent, you're looking at your beloved children, your daughters, your sons, and you're saying, what matters above all else is that they should love the Lord with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength, and live by faith in Christ. And that same conviction applies to their children.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the most consistent way to set them on the path to that? And these theological convictions flow from that.
Yeah, I think so.
You have any final thoughts?
No. Thank you, good sir. We won't mention who you are.
I wish we had this slot booked as the only slot that we could find this week to actually get together for an hour and talk about this stuff. But I wish I'd had a chance to get in touch with this guy beforehand. But if I manage to, between now and when we launch the podcast, then I'll include his name and you'll know who he is. And then he can expect a whole pile of emails from people seeking this excellent counsel from him in future. But thank you to him. Thank you to you. You've been listening to the All Saints podcast with Pastor Jeff Shaw and myself, Steve Jeffrey. God bless you, and bye for now.